From the Skyterra Wellness Retreat, this is the Inspired Intentions Podcast, where we help people build the skills and mindset to live a healthy life. Hey everyone, before we dive into today's episode, if you've been enjoying our podcast, take a moment to rate and review. It may seem like a small thing, but our ratings and reviews make a huge difference in the quality of our show. They help us reach more listeners like you so we can continue bringing you more amazing content. So, if you've found inspiration, learned something new, or just love tuning in every week, please rate the Inspired Intentions Podcast 5 stars and leave us a review and even share with a friend. We truly appreciate each and every one of you. Now let's get into the show.
Happy New Year, Inspired Intentions listeners. We are so excited for 2025. And with that start of the new year, we are actually starting a new series. And the new series is 5 episodes. It is called How to Live Forever. And we really are hoping through the next 5 episodes to be able to give you some tips and tricks on just how to improve your life, how to improve your health and wellness. And how we're doing that is we are focusing on each of our 5 pillars here at Skyterra. Our 5 pillars inform everything that we do around our program. So we have 5 really important pillars that all of our programming revolves around. And we're going to highlight each of those over the next 5 episodes and why they're so important for Skyterra, and more importantly, why they're so important for your long-term health and wellness. And actually, this aligns with the release of our brand new website. And when we released our new website, we really took the opportunity to refine the language that we use to highlight our pillars. And so hopefully you'll find this to be helpful too. And so the very first pillar that we're focusing on is movement. And who better to talk about movement than our director of fitness? Hi, Ryan.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. And welcome to the podcast. Welcome back, I should say.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me back.
Of course. You are a frequent guest on our podcast. Very, very helpful information that you give our guests and our listeners. But for anyone for whom this is their very first episode, could you please reintroduce yourself to our listeners?
Yeah, of course. So my name is Ryan Lee. I'm the fitness director here at Skyterra. Also the director of our Loose Smart program. I've been here at Skyterra for about a year now and really enjoying my time with guests and helping people to move forward, to become better versions of who they are, both physically, mentally, emotionally. So that's me.
Thanks, Ryan. Thank you so much. And as I said, this is the first in a 5-part series. We're going to focus on movement today and go through that with you. And then over the next 5 weeks, just keep an ear out for nutrition, which we'll highlight next week. And then an episode on mindfulness, an episode on play with Alan, of course. And then we'll finish that off with an episode on rest and sleep and the importance of that. So let's get into movement. So I think really importantly, Ryan, when we say movement, first and foremost, what does that mean for Skyterra?
Good question. Great question to start with. I think the first thing to consider is the fact that movement embodies a lot. There's many different ways in which we can move our body. We can do it with a lot of intention, with less intention. At the end of the day, we're designed for movement. We know that. We have a muscular system and a skeletal system that is really, it's designed to allow us to navigate the land, navigate the water to some degree. So our bodies reflect the fact that we should be in motion. And there's lots of different ways that we can place our body in motion. Again, this can be really prescriptive in how we actually exercise and train, or it can also mean the things that we do in our daily life, our daily movement patterns that are still kind of in the same bucket. As we were sitting here and you were introducing the new year, it just got me thinking a little bit too about how we're all kind of at different stages when it comes to how often we're moving, or again, how prescriptive we might be with our movement patterns. So I think I wanted to tell all of our listeners that if you are getting started with movement, this new year, it's a focus for you. I think you want to do 2 things. You want to think about the benefits of movement, and you also want to think about the downside to not moving. And I think it's 2 parts. We have this really strong affinity for pleasure, and we also want to avoid pain. Those are two real big motivating drivers for us as humans. So I often will say this in our Fitness Redefined lecture, is think about everything that movement can bring into your life in a positive way. And then also think about the things that are painful if we don't continue to incorporate movement into our days, our weeks, our months, our years.
I like that introduction. That's really important. And I think one of the things that you said that's also very important is when we say movement, we're not just talking about exercise. We're talking about all of the ways that you move your body throughout the day.
Yeah, and that's also something really important to consider is, we want to make sure that we're moving ourselves as often as humanly possible because we know of the benefits metabolically, psychologically, emotionally, etc. But something else that we want to realize is that some movement in any fashion ends up becoming better than being sedentary, being seated for prolonged periods of time. So yes, it's kind of like movement exists on this continuum. We can be in the gym lifting weights, running on a treadmill, but we can also just be really cognizant of getting up out of our chair, moving about throughout our day, doing daily chores, dancing to our favorite songs, whatever it might be. But just remember that our bodies are designed for it.
And where does all of that come into what this series is about, which is, how to live forever, how to have a long, healthy life where you're moving and especially without pain, but you're also feeling good physically, mentally, emotionally. How does all of that come into play when we're talking about movement?
Yeah, so I always think about the quote, movement or exercise is medicine. And I think that we all realize that. We know that to be true. There's enough research on it now to know that, movement is going to help us live a better life. So there's no shortage of resources there or knowledge there. Now it's a matter of incorporating it into our life, making sure that we have protocols for it so that we can consistently show up, move our body well, and reap the benefits.
So as we go through this series, we're talking about how to have a long and healthy life. Why is movement important to that longevity in a healthy way?
Yeah, so movement is critical at many different levels. When we're talking about daily movement patterns, when we're talking about walking, we might be considering how important it is that we're moving glucose out of our blood into our muscles. When it comes to targeted exercises, we might be talking about increasing muscle mass, preserving our muscular integrity so that we can do the things that we enjoy doing for the rest of our lives. We could be talking about disease prevention, which we know is critical when it comes to movement and exercise as well. So there's a lot of different reasons why exercise is movement, we can say, is so critical to our overall health and wellness. So again, I think it functions at multiple levels, and you can become really targeted with it, or you can simply remind yourself that you're designed to move. We want to move as often as we possibly can. The opposing force to this, or we should say like the counter effect, would be us becoming sedentary, not moving our body, and then ending up facing the effects of that lack of movement. And that can be the effects that our organs are experiencing. It can be related to our muscular system when we're talking about postural deviations and how muscles begin to stay in fixed positions, causing pain throughout our body. So again, movement is medicine, and now it's just building in these healthy protocols for it.
What about mental health? Where does that come into moving your body and how, we all know that we feel better when we move, but how does that help with that in the long term?
Yeah, I think that's a really big one too. We know that movement can counter the effects of stress. It's quite interesting, and I know Alan and I were talking about this the other day, where we're always looking for proper doses of stress in our life. And if we can properly dose it, then we can build back stronger. And exercise is really an example of that, where if we hit the right dosage, then we actually end up benefiting in the long run. When it comes to stress reduction overall, exercise and movement can help us to bring down cortisol levels in the long run. It can help to release those positive feel-good endorphins that we all talk about, especially after running, strength training. So I think this is all part of the equation as well. Movement and exercise helps us to mitigate the just the chaos of the world around us in a way. We know that life is hard, and that's why I view fitness and movement as kind of a safeguard. It's like a shield against those things in our life that are sometimes really heavy to carry.
Mm-hmm. Since you invoked his name, I'll continue on with this because he's in the booth with us off mic. One of the things that I know Alan talks about a lot, especially when it comes to play and recreation, is just this sense of community and being able to find other people to do activities with you, to be outside, to have fun, to experience joy with. What about the social connection to movement? Where does that come into play?
I think the social connection is different for each person. At a personality level, perhaps, there are some people who I think thrive within communities or groups of people who are like-minded, who are moving their bodies in similar ways, whether they're recreational activities, whether they're gym buddies, whatever you want to call it. And I do think that there's some real benefit to that. There's social belonging that takes place there. And I think for others, maybe they're not in as much a need for that social connectivity. So I think that's kind of like to be assessed on an individual basis. But I know that I have certainly benefited from kind of that social fabric when it comes to fitness, having some close friends who, would work out with you. There's some social accountability built into that as well. We just show up as better versions of ourselves when we have others around us who are doing the same and are expecting it of us. So I think that there's definitely some real truth to that.
One of the things, I know we've talked about this, Ryan, is this kind of battle buddy mentality where if you're, for example, as I've done, trained for several months for one event, trained for several months for a marathon, for example, the people that you go through that with, the people that you meet at 5 a.m. in the cold for your long runs, there's just a connection that is built, and it's because you've gone through something hard together. And I think thinking about community, it's really, for the folks who want that, is a way to really deepen those relationships.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's it's a trust factor too. I think that's what ends up happening is when you navigate experiences with someone or several people, that you start to trust in the fact that they'll show up for you and they're going to show up for themselves. So I think that definitely happens when it comes to, fitness, movement, and the people around you at the time.
Is movement an insurance policy?
I would say 1,000% yes. I was thinking about this analogy, and hopefully it'll be easier to track. But I was thinking about how our life is obviously this very intricate yet beautifully designed masterpiece. So it kind of reminds me of like a puzzle. And the puzzle is already complete. It's already fully constructed. But then as life happens, I think that we kind of get jostled around. It reminds me of trying to put the puzzle together or keeping it together while driving in a car. I don't know if you've ever tried to do something like this when driving.
Oh, wow.
As a passenger, not as a driver.
It's a lot.
I remember when I'm like a little kid, like playing like different games in the backseat, on like road trips, things like that. And it's really difficult. Every time you ride over like a pothole or something, it's like either the puzzle pieces get shifted or whatever game you're playing, the little pieces go flying all over the place.
Especially if it's not magnetic.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's actually interesting that you just brought that up. So this is the point that I'm making, or at least the connection I'm attempting to make to fitness. So you asked if it's an insurance policy, movement. So I feel like as life progresses, as we age, we end up hitting more of those little road bumps, those little speed bumps, and the puzzle's constantly getting shifted around. And, we might be experiencing some different health issues or medical issues. And the goal is that we don't want to have to constantly be reconstructing the puzzle. It takes a lot of effort. So if we can develop some mechanism, whether it be magnets or maybe we put a little glue behind each of the puzzle pieces, it just helps us to maintain the progress that we've already made, so that we don't have to constantly feel like it's a recreation of the entire image or the entire game. And I think that's what movement is. Movement is kind of like applying a little bit of glue to each of those pieces. It's a safeguard against the things that are naturally going to happen to us as we age. It can just help to keep that puzzle more complete for a longer period of time.
Do you have a prescription for something that folks can add into their lives that would serve as that glue or serve as that magnet, something that's been proven really specifically, maybe especially for folks who are just thinking about getting started and being more intentional around their movement?
Yeah, really important question. I think especially at the beginning of a new year when a lot of us are thinking about new goals that we might have, there are so many things we can incorporate when it comes to movement that sometimes it can feel overwhelming. And we discussed that with guests here at Skyterra about how we don't want to take such a huge bite out of this that it feels like it's undoable. So my suggestion would simply be we rely on the movement patterns that we've been performing forever. When in doubt, walk. That's the biggest one for me. I think walking is one of the most undervalued movement patterns, but it can have such huge benefits. I know we were discussing, a really important study that was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association with regard to 7,000 steps, the acquisition of 7,000 steps in a given day, and its connection to a 50 to 70% reduction in all-cause mortality rates. So that would be death by any cause other than accident. We're talking about cancer. We're talking about heart disease, neurodegenerative diseases. So we're thinking, okay, so by simply acquiring 7,000 steps, I'm going to increase my lifespan by X percent. It's pretty powerful. And walking, I think, is accessible for so many of us. That's where I would start.
Yeah. I want to say that again. So 7,000 steps a day has been proven to reduce all-cause mortality, so forms of death other than accident, between 50% and 70%.
Exactly.
It's amazing.
It's amazing. And when I first heard that study, I kind of joke around about it. And I always say, if you put that into pill form, everyone will take that capsule.
Yes.
There's no one who would not take that pill.
Yeah.
So now we just have to think again, all right, how do I make this a non-negotiable? How do I establish it as a protocol into my life? We talk a lot here at Skyterra about, habit coupling. If you're looking to establish a new habit, especially when it comes to something like movement, you think to yourself, what are the things that I'm already currently doing? What's something that's a non-negotiable for me already in my life? And we always say, well, eating is one of them, right? We're all going to eat at different times of the day. We try to habit couple walking after eating for the benefit, obviously, of moving that glucose out of the bloodstream, but also because it's a great habit to get into, generally speaking. So look to those things that you're already doing each day, and then see if you can attach one of these basic movement patterns to that pre-existing habit.
And we know how important strength training is. Where does strength training play into the improvement of longevity? How does building and maintaining that muscle mass contribute to living a longer, healthier life?
Yeah, so strength training, as a lot of us know, is a critical component of our fitness regimen. First and foremost, as we age, and even prior to the later decades of our life, we want a body that is fully functioning, that can perform the leisure activities that we love. So that's really where my mind is at now, as I think to myself, what are the activities that I want to be able to do with my children? Do I want to be able to go hiking? Do I want to be able to hop on a mountain bike and, go out for a ride? The only way that we can perform those activities is if we have enough muscular integrity to do so, right? Our muscles are the levers that are pulling upon our bones, right? It's moving us throughout this physical world. Especially as we age, we talk about the number 40 when it comes to our age as being that time period at which we begin to experience sarcopenia, or the natural loss of muscle mass. And if we do nothing to preserve it, then we don't have the muscular integrity to do those activities that we just talked about. The other reason why this is so critical is because if we preserve enough muscle mass through strength training, then we reduce the risk of taking those falls that we know can sometimes lead to fatality. So that's the reason why we push strength training just at a physical level. We want to be able to move well. We want to prevent falls as we age. Strength training also has a lot of benefits when it comes to our metabolism. We know that our muscle mass is metabolically much more efficient than fat mass. So as we become more muscled, our basal metabolic rate increases, we're burning more calories at rest, and these are all things that we want. We don't want to be storing excess adipose tissue on our body, fat stores. Muscle mass really helps to counter that. It keeps us in a high performing metabolic state, if you will. And then I guess maybe the last one, I think these are really the big three, is just thinking about how putting the body under tension via strength training is also going to have benefits when it comes to our bones. And we want to think about preventing fractures and breaks as we age. So, increasing bone density is critical as well.
And you may have already answered this, but if you're thinking about movement that you should be prioritizing as you age, are there specific types of movement that are more important at an older stage in your life versus a younger stage in your life?
That's a really good question. So we often focus on functional movement patterns in our fitness programming here at Skyterra. We want to be functional at every stage of our life, but especially as we age, and there's an assortment of reasons why this happens, but we can begin to deviate from what those functional movements look like. To give you some examples, hinging our hips is a functional movement pattern. And you say, okay, well, why is it functional? Because it mimics what we do daily. We might want to hinge our hips to reach down to that lowest drawer in the refrigerator to pull something out. Or maybe we want to lift our grandkids up over our head and we need to hinge at our hips to grab them. So those are the functional patterns that we want to keep practicing. Things like pushing and pulling and squatting. So all that is really critical. The other piece that I would build into this, which is also a part of our programming here, is to think about, when we're aging, are we able to maintain our balance and the length tension relationships that exist in the muscular system? The aging process tends to put our body into fixed positions, and that's often because of repetitive movements. So I'm kind of touching a little bit on mobility now, Rachel. It's this is an issue for all of us, but especially as we age, the body has seen repetitive movements more often. So just to give you a quick example. So if you're someone who has a desk job and you constantly find yourself typing, you're on a computer, what's happening there is that our body is being moved into a forward position. We have protracted shoulders through the contraction of our chest, through our front deltoids and our shoulders. And when we hold those positions for long periods of time, this is very similar to if you had like a brand new garden hose that's been wrapped up in a circle, and then you go to lengthen that garden hose. It has the natural propensity to want to go back to its circular positioning. Same thing with our musculature, right? So now that our shoulders have been protracted for so long, so many hours per day, now the muscles want to stay in those contracted states. And those postural deviations can start to cause pain throughout our body. It's bringing us out of proper alignment. So this is a reason why mobility becomes something that's also, I think, pretty important as we age, if we want to be pain-free, if we want to be able to move well. So I think incorporating some lengthening-based exercises can be really helpful. Soft tissue work, where we might be foam rolling through muscles, static stretching, all really nice protocols to build in.
And I just want to give a quick reminder for our listeners. We do have skyterraathome.com, where we have some different yoga and mobility videos as well if you're looking for something that you can do right away.
Nice.
And then how does this kind of all come together? So we've talked about strength training, cardio, mobility. How do I go about figuring out how much time I spend and how which of those is the most important when it comes to prioritizing? Because we're all so busy.
Exactly. So I think you have to take a real earnest assessment on what you're willing to commit to. And that's just you being honest with yourself and knowing what your life demands look like. And then once you know the amount of time that you might be able to give to this process, then you can start to build in a bit of daily movement, a bit of strength training, a bit of cardiovascular training, and then maybe a bit of mobility as well. But to pull it back again, I would say if you are not moving much at all currently, then you just start with getting up from that seated position and walking.
Yeah.
And then from there, we know the compounding effects of the things that we do. That might turn into a single day of strength training. After we have said to ourselves, I'm walking each day now after meals. Perhaps I can build in a single strength training, 30-minute experience using those 6 functional movement patterns that we were talking about. And then maybe that becomes 2 days. We do have some general prescriptions for this, and I'm always a little hesitant to throw those out just because, again, if you're not really on a path currently, this can seem like a lot. But we know that now we're looking at about 2 to 3 days of strength training in order to, properly tax the musculoskeletal system. When it comes to our cardio commitments, again, we can build in a couple of days of cardio training, which, I know we didn't talk about extensively today, but, our cardio approach might look different depending on if we're more sports specific and, driven through a particular recreational activity. But there's some different modalities that we can use when it comes to cardiovascular training. So a couple days there could be nice. Again, there's some bleeding effect. So some people ask me, do daily movement patterns fall under cardiovascular training? And the answer is always yes. So if you are diligently walking on a treadmill for 20 minutes or 30 minutes, then that's going to count for your daily movement patterns as well. So there is some carryover, but hopefully through this conversation, you're realizing that it's a building.
Yeah.
It's not going to be do all of these 4 or 5 things that we've mentioned today to completion, especially, again, if you have not started. So I would say just start slow. Daily movement is always first, right? Then we can start to build in the strength, some cardiovascular training. And our mobility training can always sit at the backdrop of the things that we do each day. I really enjoy doing these kinds of things first thing in the morning. Other people enjoy some, stretching or soft tissue work later in the evening, depending on how their nervous system responds. So I just kind of use that as like maintenance for my body. That helps me to perform better when it comes to strength and cardiovascular training.
Do you do mobility before or after your cold plunge?
Oh, good question. So there's some mixed philosophies on when muscles should be lengthened. So pretty interesting, actually, research. I don't want to go down too far rabbit hole with it, but I actually, depending on if it is a cold plunge day, sometimes I will not do both. Again, there's some nuance to this, but I try to tease those days out. So if I'm doing lengthening-based movements, stretching, I will do those on separate days than when I go into the cold water.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. But some people, I would say the most current research is that now doing cold plunge or cold water exposure prior to exercise can actually be really beneficial. The thing that we want to be careful of if you're doing any cold water exposure is that strength training and then moving right into a very cold environment can actually halt the anabolic effects of the strength training. Again, not an expert on the reasoning, but I'd imagine through kind of that vasoconstriction, right, we're eliminating the ability to bring nutrients to those sites.
Got it.
So.
And then, Ryan, before we give our listeners something that they can do starting today, do you have anything else that you want to add to what we consider to be movement here at Skyterra and why it is such an important and the first pillar that we're highlighting?
I would say there's so many things that we can do with our body. Some of them are going to seem, again, very prescriptive. Others are going to be things that we just love to do. And maybe if this feels daunting, if movement, like when I say movement or I say exercise, if it brings about some negative feeling within you, there's some like resistance there, then I think that your first goal is to find a way in which you can move that's attractive to you. Not all of us are going to fall in love with strength training, but maybe you can fall in love with pickleball, or maybe you can fall in love with hiking. And I think that's probably another great starting point, is just kind of lead with your heart, follow your heart, and think about the things that you enjoy doing. And if that can bring your body into motion, then that's a win. And then obviously, let's not neglect some of those more prescriptive things that we know are beneficial for us. So that would be my advice to all of us.
And then one of the things that you said right at the beginning of the episode is, as you're framing this, thinking about the benefits of movement and then the downside of not having movement in your life as well.
Yeah, that kind of brings it full circle. So I would probably attack it from that angle as well. And I'm a big believer in journaling, in writing out the things that we're thinking, because through writing and also through speaking, right, what those two things are they're organized thinking. That's what it is. And I think that's really helpful to just continuously be trying to organize and formalize the way in which we think. And we can do that through writing. I would try to journal on this or meditate on this and ask yourself again, what are the upsides to movement? How can I serve my body through these choices? but then spend a sizable amount of time just asking yourself, if in 10 years I choose not to do some of these things that may be challenging, that may make me feel uncomfortable at first, what are going to be the detriments? What will I miss out on? What will my family miss out on? That can be a huge motivator for us.
And then to get started, coming back to that idea of just getting up from a seated position, the benefits of that 7,000 step threshold. Anything else you want to give our listeners for today?
I think those are the big ones. So start small, start with those little exercise snacks that we've talked about in the past. If you are one who is sitting a lot throughout your day, just try to break that up and use any means necessary to do that. Set yourself a timer. I know now, a lot of our smartwatches are telling us, get up and move, it's time. Let's try to listen to that. Let's try to really be intentional about, what we're doing with our time throughout the day. Little things can go a long way. We were talking about parking really far away from the grocery store entrance. That's the one we hear all the time. And sometimes you think, does it make a difference? And at the end of the day, it does make a difference. You're a different creature at the end of the year from having done that each time you went to the grocery store. You got those additional steps because you parked so far away. All right, you are, doing sit to stand every 30 minutes of sitting down, at your workstation. Just keep adding those small practical applications into your life.
They make a difference.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much, Ryan.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was fun.
Yes.
As I was sitting here, I was thinking about, just us in this room and thinking about how, movement has become such an important part of who we are. And, I've thought about you and your running habits. And I don't know, I just think it makes us a more complete version of who we are. It makes us feel better, but it also kind of crafts our identity in some ways. So it's great. I love it. It drives me. And hopefully I can continue to serve others, through this modality.
Thanks so much, Ryan. And listeners, stay tuned. Over the next 4 weeks, we will be releasing the next 4 episodes of this series on how to live forever. So as always, thanks for listening, and thanks again to you, Ryan.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Talk to you soon.
The Inspired Intentions podcast is a production of Skyterra Wellness Retreat. Special thanks to our executive producer, Alan Broyhill. Send us your questions and comments to inspiredintentions@skyterrawellness.com. Subscribe on iTunes and everywhere podcasts can be found. If someone you know might benefit from this podcast, share Inspired Intentions with them and give us a 5-star rating. Join us next week as we cut through the unrealistic noise on diets and fitness and show you how healthy living fits seamlessly into your already busy life. Thanks for listening.